Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Joel Crowder, and I'm a part of the State Bar of Montana's Law Related Education Committee. And on behalf of the State Bar of Montana and the Law Related Education Committee, I want to welcome you tonight to the kickoff of our second annual Citizens Law School event and series. This is a series of 8 weekly online events on different topics in the law of interest to the public. The Citizens Law School was launched last year by the State Bar of Montana with the purpose of sharing information and education with the public about the workings of Montana's legal profession and legal system, and to provide insights into particular areas of the law that are of interest. Public trust and understanding of our legal system and the legal profession is critical to our democracy. And so this educational program aims to further this trust and understanding of the law and our profession. Throughout tonight's presentation, individuals will be able to put questions into the chat that Professor Conley will be able to answer throughout tonight's program. And so I just want to encourage you to think of different questions you might have so we can answer those. With that, tonight's topic is AI and the law, and I have the honor of introducing Professor Anna Conley. Professor Conley is an assistant professor at the Alexander Blewett III School of Law at the University of Montana. Her areas of expertise include civil litigation, comparative law, international law, and human rights. Professor Conley has a JD from the George Washington Law School and an LLM and Doctor of Civil Laws from McGill University Faculty of Law. Professor Conley has litigated many large-scale, complex cases, participated in several rule of law initiatives, and published extensively in international and comparative law. Professor Conley lives in Missoula with her husband and 2 children and enjoys Missoula's vibrant arts and endless outdoor recreational opportunities. And I just want to turn things over to Professor Conley now.
All right, thank you so much, Joel. Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me okay, Joel?
I can, yes.
Great. So I'm really excited to be here tonight and talk to you about AI and the law. We're going to just jump right in and give you a little roadmap about what we're going to talk about. We're going to cover 3 main topics. The first is just breaking down what is AI and what is generative AI. The second is looking at regulation of AI, how the law has tried to regulate this technology. And then the third thing we're going to look at is generative AI, a type of AI, and how it's impacting lawyers, how it's impacting the law. So let's jump right in. So we think about AI, and that's a really big bucket. There's a lot of things in AI. So if we think about non-generative AI, what is that? Well, non-generative AI is things like search engines. When we're thinking about AI, we're thinking about algorithms. And basically what an algorithm is it's a set of instructions that is programmed into software or a program, and you say, hey, computer, software, use this set of instructions and go forth and create things, do things. So for example, with search engines like Google or Bing, they use algorithms to see what you're asking, what you're telling it you want to find, and go out and find things based on the words that you used, using this algorithmic logic that they're programmed to have. So search engines are an example. Email filters, sometimes somebody sends you an email and it goes directly to your spam. Well, that's not a human in your email server trying to look at all of your emails. That's a email server that has been programmed with a certain algorithm to try to identify things. And that computer all by itself, without a human, uses that algorithm and says, that's spam, that's not spam. So it's categorizing based on an algorithm. Another example, voice-activated assistants. I know it might be a surprise, but Siri is actually not a person. Siri is just voice recognition and algorithmic AI. So voice recognition technology, here's what you're saying, and then the algorithm takes it and processes it just like a search engine, trying to go find what you are asking it to find. Even things like credit scores, fraud detection, and health and fitness apps. All of these things are doing the same thing. They're using algorithms to find information. So within AI, we also have generative AI. This is a newer type of AI, and it has one major difference from non-generative AI, and that is that it generates new and original content. So while the non-generative AI will go find things for you, generative AI will actually create things for you. It will create text, it will create images, music, video. So I want to break down how it does this. With regard to text generative AI, for example, what it does is it learns and mimics from data sets. And one way you think about this or you hear is this LLM, or large language model. So ChatGPT, for example, is generative AI, and generative AI's data set is the internet, right? That's ChatGPT's data set. So you can ask ChatGPT to go create the best chocolate chip cookie recipe in the world. And what ChatGPT will do is it will take its data set, which is the internet, and it will find all of the chocolate chip cookie recipes on the internet using language searching. And then it will mimic those and create a chocolate chip cookie recipe for you. Now that's different because it's actually creating the recipe for you, as opposed to non-generative AI, where you say, I want a chocolate chip cookie recipe, and you search and it just gives you a bunch of websites that have one. Generative AI is actually creating something. And ChatGPT is just really one of many other forms of generative AI. So it's the one that we're all familiar with now, but as we'll talk about later, ChatGPT is showing us this way of technology, this way of interacting with technology, but it's not the only manifestation of this generative AI technology. So now let's talk a little bit about AI in the law. I'm definitely no IT expert, but I'm happy to answer any questions about this general overview before we start digging into how the law and AI are interacting. Okay, I'm gonna plow ahead unless there are questions.
No questions in the chat right now.
Okay, so this is where it's going to get interesting for those of you who are interested in law. I feel kind of bad about using this cartoon because Dianne Feinstein just passed away, but I like this cartoon because it really proves a point. And the point that this is proving is that law is always lagging behind technology. So technology is running away and law is trying to catch up. And it's really always been that way. And so AI is no exception. We've had AI around for a long time. As you saw from some of those examples we just talked about, we've been using non-generative AI for many years, but it's really not been something that's been very regulated. And in fact, now that we have generative AI really changing everything for us, lawmakers at the state and federal and international levels are starting to go, wait a minute, we need to look a little closer at all types of AI. So some of the major areas of concern that lawmakers and policymakers have with regard to AI are privacy. So you have AI going out and gathering all of this information and plugging it into algorithms and making decisions based on the information that it's gathering. So of course, we're just thinking about basics. How is it getting our information? How is it storing our information? How is it using our information? So all of that is one of the major things that law is thinking about with AI. Again, how is it being used? Is it being used to perpetuate fraud? Is it being used to steal our identity? Is it being used to steal our information? How is it that we're using it? And so we have some laws being created that are talking about only allowing legitimate uses of AI and obviously criminalizing illegitimate uses of AI. We also have laws that are working on impact assessments. And what I mean by that is you have states that are saying, well, hold on, our state agencies that are using AI need to do assessments and make sure that the use of AI isn't negatively impacting people who are part of the decision. So for example, if a person seeks food stamps and the state agency is using AI to determine whether they're entitled to it or not, we have to make sure that not having a human touch on that decision is not negatively impacting the person who is or is not receiving the entitlement. And then we have some laws talking about only using the minimum necessary information about people when you're using AI to make decisions. Another area of law that we're talking about a lot is automated decision-making and profiling. So all of you have applied for a job. A lot of you have probably done hiring. And what you do when you're applying for a job is you give your resume, and when you're hiring someone, you look at all the resumes, you see who has the criteria that you want, and you work toward hiring the best person. Well, there are definite opportunities to use AI to replace humans with those decisions about who to hire, who to interview, which resumes to go on to the next step. And AI generally has a lot of bias built into it. And I'll talk a little bit about the different bias that you see with AI a little bit later. So there are some laws prohibiting the use of AI for employment. There are some laws that say if you're going to use AI for employment screening, you need to do some assessments. Again, these impact assessments to make sure you're not engaging in discrimination. Same thing with healthcare diagnostics. So it's not uncommon for in a healthcare setting to use AI to say, here are the symptoms, so plug them in, and then have a non-human determine the diagnosis based on the symptoms that were plugged in using an algorithm. And so there's some laws that require that that type of AI is vetted by professionals. So we know that it's going to be creating actual results and that there's some auditing of use of AI in healthcare diagnostic settings. Then we have insurance premium calculations. Again, this is something that has been used for a long time. AI has been used in this setting. And so making sure that we have regulators who say, okay, we have to make sure that the Commissioner on Insurance has approved this AI algorithm before using it to calculate insurance premiums. And then social media content, that's a pretty interesting one. There are some actual cities and states that are looking at how social media services are using AI to say this should be on our servers, this shouldn't be on our servers, and making sure that we're not infringing the First Amendment when we're making determinations about what should or shouldn't be on social media. And then another area of law that I think is pretty interesting is transparency and accountability. So how do I know when a company or when a government agency is using AI to make a decision about me? And is there anything that I can do about that? Is there any appeal that I can make to a human decision maker if only AI is used in the decision about an entitlement that I have or a privilege that I'm asking for? And then here's another big one. Not only is it how do you know when a company or a government is making a decision about you using AI, but also, how do you know when algorithms are deciding what you see? So it's not uncommon on the internet for your online behavior to lead you down certain rabbit holes or down certain trajectories. And it's really these algorithms that are determining what you see next based on what you've looked at. And so you do have a situation where one person might be looking at something and that online behavior leads them down to see a bunch of information, that another person, because they're looking at something else, leads them down another road to see a bunch of information. And they actually never see the same information, even if they're looking at the same general subject matter because of their online behavior. And a lot of people point to this algorithmic online behavior tracking as one of the main reasons why we have a lot of partisan divide in our country right now, because people are not even seeing the same thing. So they're not even having the same information to make decisions about what's best for their community, what's best for their country, what's best for the world. So how do I know when algorithms are deciding what I'm actually seeing when I'm online? So those are some of the big overarching areas with regard to law and AI. And I warned Joel that I was going to do a little test. So when we think about law and generative AI, we talk about not just AI, algorithmic decision making, but AI that can generate things. And this is a whole new area of law that is changing the game considerably. So Joel, what do you think out of these 6 individuals, which ones are real and which ones are AI generated images?
So I think the bottom center one is real. And I would say the top left photo looks real. And the others I would say are all AIs. I'd say 2 real, 4 AIs.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, that is a trick question because they're all AI generated.
Well, I got
So-
4 out of 6 right then.
Right. So none of these people are real, but they all look pretty darn real, or some of them do. You can tell that there's one that is missing an earring. One of them, their earrings don't match. Another one has something on his head that doesn't look quite right. But I mean, at least 2 look pretty darn human. So what this is getting at is the fact that a generative AI really is changing the game about what people see and what they know to be real and what they don't understand, that might not be real. So here are some of the big issues with law and generative AI. The first one is intellectual property. Who owns text, images, artwork that's generated solely by a non-human? And another big, that's really resulting in the Patent and Trademark Office having to work overtime with trying to answer this question because humans aren't creating this. So who has intellectual property rights over these works? So we're seeing a lot of trying to address property IP issues, administrative regulations at the patent and trademark federal level are trying to deal with this question. And then another big area of concern are what we would call deep fakes and misinformation. So not only can AI generate these images, but AI can take images of real people and make it appear that they are saying things that they are not saying or doing things that they have never done. So it becomes very hard to know if what you're seeing is real or not. So there are concerns that the law needs to regulate the malicious use of deep fakes or synthetic media. And we're seeing that even with the Gaza Strip situation. I've heard in the news the last couple of days that there are lots of videos out there that are just simply not real and are being put out there on media and social media as this is what's happening when it's just not what's happening. And then hundreds of thousands of people see that, and then they make decisions or they make calculations based on that. Another big issue is bias. So remember, I said at the beginning that generative AI has to have a data set. So ChatGPT's data set is the internet. But the internet has a lot of what we would call group attribution bias in it. So there's lots of stereotyping based on gender, based on race in the internet. So if you have the internet as your data set and you're creating work product that mimics that, you're going to create a biased product. Similarly, you have this concept of availability bias. So if you have a type of information where that information is on the internet, and then you have a type of information that's less likely to be on the internet, and the internet is your data set, then what you're going to end up with is a work product that's generated that focuses more on the type of information that's in the internet and doesn't focus as much on information that might be less available on the internet. And then you have automation bias. Automation bias is when you ask ChatGPT a question and you just assume that it's right, that it's an automated answer, and you're not going to double check it. You're not going to challenge it. You just assume it's right because ChatGPT did it, and that's that. And so we have to be very careful about making sure that human decision makers are not biasing toward automated generative AI. So again, if your data set is biased, then what you create from that data set is going to be biased. And you really have to know what it is that's in your data set. So you have to make sure that you are aware of what the generative AI is pulling from. And then another issue with law and generative AI is, again, disclosure and transparency. How do I know if what I'm reading is from generative AI or if it was written by a human? What kind of disclosure is needed when you're using generative AI? Especially this gets important when you're thinking about job applications, cover letters, school applications, emails, government correspondence. Do you have a right to know that what you're receiving was actually computer generated? Is there some obligation to have human eyes on it before it goes out? So those types of issues. And just to give a brief overview of the current legal landscape, to answer that first IP question, this is going to create IP law and litigation for a really long time, this new generative AI. This image is an image that was generated solely by AI. It was a software that was created, and no human did anything to create this other than create the software that then created this. And earlier this summer, the person who created the software, who created this image, asked to get it copyrighted and wanted the copyright in the name of the software because the software was what created it. And the Copyright Office and also the federal court said, no, human authorship is a bedrock requirement of copyright. So non-humans that generate works cannot have intellectual property protections over those generated works. So that's where we're at right now, but it's going to be many years of different IP questions in this area. The other interesting IP question is, when ChatGPT goes out and gathers all of the information on the internet to mimic, it's gathering protected works. A lot of stuff on the internet is IP protected. And is generative AI's use of that violating the intellectual property rights of the individuals who own the information that's creating the data set? So those are two of the big IP issues that we're seeing develop with generative AI. So some of the actual or proposed laws that we've seen at the state level regulating AI, we've seen state laws requiring companies that use AI to make sure that they're doing assessments to impact, to see how it's impacting people who are the subject of the AI. It's being restricted in certain industries. There's some quality control measures when it's being used for healthcare decisions. There's requirements that humans are part of safety determinations, for example, in the public transit context. It restricts or prohibits governments from solely using AI to make determinations like with regard to entitlements like food or housing assistance. And also there are some laws thinking about requiring disclosures when government agencies are making decisions utilizing AI that might impact you. And I will just say, if anyone's super interested in this as a policymaker, the National Conference of State Legislatures has an amazing website that has lots and lots of the laws that have been thought about, have been proposed, and actually have come into force in states throughout the US. So I'd highly recommend taking a look at the National Conference of State Legislatures to get some ideas there. Lots and lots of study bills too, as you can imagine, lots and lots of bills saying, oh, we're going to direct an agency to look closer at this and then come back next session. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you, and I'm going to switch gears here in a second and talk a little bit more specifically about the legal profession, but I'm happy to have a little dialogue about some of this before we move on.
I don't see any questions, but I have a couple of questions, Professor, if I may.
Oh, great.
And you might get into this towards the end of your program, but I wonder, based on that question of the 6 images on who was AI generated or not, is there anything we can do to protect ourselves when we're looking at media and trying to determine, is this real or is this fake? Because I actually had the very same thought on the whole, Israel Gaza situation, on some of the images I saw, as far as, I want to make sure these are accurate images, and I don't know if what I'm looking at is or not. And so what can we do to protect ourselves, if anything?
It's a great question. My kids talk about media literacy, and they are studying that in high school, which makes me really happy. And I think it's really drilling into, where am I getting this from? Is this a credible source? Is there something here that I'm seeing that is suggesting that this might not be? Unfortunately, it's really just using common sense and really trying to rely on credible media sources. And when you see something that's been shared over and over again, trying to come back to that original source of, where did you first see it? Where did they share it from? And tracing it back. But it requires a fair amount of diligence. You just cannot see something and believe that it's real when you're looking at a digital image or digital text or even digital video. You really do have to take a step back and look at the credibility of the source.
And then I just have one more question. You mentioned about the algorithms and how they can cause a person to kind of become siloed, maybe because they're now seeing the same stream of information. I guess I'm just curious, what is the benefit to whoever has programmed these algorithms to have us see the same kind of information? I'm just trying to understand that.
That's a great question. I wish I had a better answer for you. I'm sure there's people out there that know the answer to that better. I think some of it has to do with advertising and targeting advertising as you're going down these rabbit holes. But I think also it's meant to show you something that they think you're going to be interested in. And it's that simple. You can go down these YouTube rabbit holes, for example, and they say, well, you saw this, so maybe you're interested in this, and maybe you're interested in this. And it's not a person making that determination. It's just sort of a subject matter algorithm, but it ends up having the effect of moving you downstream in a direction that someone else would move downstream another way.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions before we move on?
Any other questions?
Okay. So please drop questions in the Q&A. I would love to hear from you. And I'm sure some of you actually have better answers to some of this than I do. So I'd love to make this a community dialogue. Please feel free to reach out. And I'll move on now to AI in the legal profession. So the legal profession, when I say legal profession, I'm talking about lawyers, judges, paralegals. And when I say lawyers, of course, I'm talking about private practice lawyers. I'm talking about public defenders. I'm talking about prosecutors. I'm talking about government attorneys. There's so many different types of attorneys out there. And really, all of our profession has used non-generative AI for a really long time. When I went to law school 20 years ago, our profession was tilting from books and what we call court reporters, which are just these volume books that have all of the cases that a certain jurisdiction or a certain court issued every year. And they had these organizational head notes that you would go and you'd find the head note, and then that would lead you to another case, and that would lead you to another case. And it was sort of a long time in the library that you'd spend doing your legal research from book to book. And about 20 years ago, we changed to databases. And so instead of all of these books, all of the cases that we needed to read and research, all of the statutes that we needed to understand, those all became electronic and they became privatized, so that you had these companies who would provide you with a wide set of all of the things that you needed to do your legal research. And what we would do is, just like a search, just like on Google, you go into these databases and you would search, unjust enrichment and, whatever it is that you were searching, and you would search it within, for example, Montana courts. And then your search results would show you all of this stuff that then you needed to read and understand so that you could understand the legal issue in your case, so that you could write your memo, so you could write your brief, so you could write your pleadings, so you could go to trial, and that you knew the law that applied to your case. So we've been using that for a really long time, these databases, and they've gotten better and better and better and better. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, because the better they get, the more thorough they are, the more time it takes for us to read everything that might be applicable to our case. And the more that we can go see, well, what did this state do if there's no good cases in Montana? And what did this state do? And it really has just opened up the world of available arguments and sources that lawyers can rely upon. So that's something we've been doing for a long time, and it's gotten better and better. Same thing with document review. In a large case, you might have 500,000 documents that you're exchanging with the other side. And it's really hard for a human to look at every single one of those documents. So what you do is you upload them and you make them all electronic files, and you make them searchable, and you search for all of the terms that you want. And then it gives you the documents that have all of those terms in them. And then you can use those as evidence in your case and as exhibits in your case. So we've been using AI for a long time for that as well. We've been doing it for contract review, when you want to have a template and then you search the terms that you want and you negotiate those terms. And interestingly, we've been using AI in the legal profession too for what you call predictive analysis. So AI can basically, you can type in what your client's medical damages are, what type of case it is, and you can do some predictions on what they might get in a jury trial. Those have generally been discredited, not necessarily very accurate, but we have been using all of this non-generative AI for quite a long time. But now the game has changed with AI and with generative AI and the legal profession. So with non-generative AI, I get all the cases, I get all the statutes, but I still have to write the brief. I still have to write out what I want to file with the court. I still have to draft the complaint. But with generative AI, I can ask it to draft my complaint for me. I can ask it to draft my motion. And that makes it so that it is generating the work product instead of me, as opposed to me generating the work product based on my searching. So lawyers obviously got excited about this right away with ChatGPT coming out last December, but it didn't take long for us to be in the news about it. There were some New York lawyers that used ChatGPT 3. So that was the previous version of ChatGPT. And what ChatGPT 3 did is it hallucinated. What it would do is it would comb the internet and it would create cases that it thought should exist based on what it saw on the internet, as opposed to cases that actually did exist. And I was kind of experimenting with this myself, kind of seeing what the technology was like. And I asked it to draft a memo for me. And it did the exact same thing to me. It drafted a memo and it gave me cases. And I said, I don't think that's a real case. And I looked it up and sure enough, it wasn't. So ChatGPT 3 was hallucinating. And the lawyers in New York, they didn't know that it did that. So they drafted a brief and they filed it with the court. And some of the cases in their brief didn't exist. And the other side raised the issue. And it turned out that they had let ChatGPT draft this brief for them. They hadn't checked it. They filed it as is. And then I think what happened, and I'm not 100% sure about this because I didn't go back and look, but I think that the judge asked them to produce the cases. And they went and they asked ChatGPT for the cases, and ChatGPT created them for them. And they didn't exist. So ultimately, these lawyers were sanctioned. And this was not a good thing for the lawyers, but it was a great thing for the legal profession because it made everybody go, whoa, we can't jump the gun here. This technology is not ready for us to use it reliably. And so ChatGPT, I think for lawyers right now is something that you can maybe look at as a starting place, but it's not something that would replace the human judgment and research and writing that is needed for good lawyering. It's not yet. If you look at this graph, however, or this little graphic, you see that ChatGPT is just one type of generative AI. Right now, all of those databases, those companies that have created those beautiful databases that we use, they're working really hard to make a product where you can have generative AI with a really sound data set. So the only thing that it's mimicking is actual real cases and real statutes. And once they're able to do that, which we're really pretty close to, it really is going to be something where a lawyer can ask a generative AI product to generate something for the lawyer, and she's going to have a pretty good product there. Of course, you're still going to have to check it, but it's going to be pretty good. Nothing like what we've seen this last year with this new technology that's not ready for prime time and reliable use for lawyers. So, my own estimate is that we're a couple years out from really reliable generative AI software for lawyers. My also personal estimate is that most lawyers will be using generative AI regularly in 5 years, if not sooner. So some of the issues that we lawyers have to be thinking about with generative AI are decision accountability. So we have to retain the ability to make decisions based on sound, experienced legal judgment. So I've been practicing for 20 years, and a lot of those years have taught me things that I would only have learned through that experience. And it's that experience that really helps me make decisions that I think are important for my client. Without that experience, my decisions would be missing something, probably missing something pretty important. And also, law takes a fair amount of creativity, and you really have to be able to think about a case in a couple different ways and from a couple different perspectives. You have to be able to think through legal strategy from where you're at to where you're trying to go. And it really does take a human mind to be able to do that. So decision accountability remains really important, that at the end of the day, the human is accountable to the bar, is accountable to the judge, and most importantly, is accountable to their client for the decisions that are made. You can't just say, well, generative AI thought it was a good idea. At the end of the day, it's your decision that you have to live with as the attorney. Another thing that's important for generative AI in the legal profession is ethics. So we have to tell our clients if we're going to be using generative AI. And I think in a couple of years, clients are going to be expecting generative AI to be used by attorneys. Once we have really good product that will be creating really good initial drafts for us, it will be a time saver. I think that we're going to be moving in that direction. And then also disclosure to the court, if what we're providing to the court is generated by AI or not. And, every state has their own bar, has their own ethical obligations, but as a country, we have a standard set of ethical obligations that don't vary much from state to state. And this is something that is front and center for bars across the country, thinking about how our ethics rules are going to interplay with attorneys' use of this technology. So it's something that's going to be at the front of what bars are thinking about right now and continuing for the next several years as we start to see what the technology can do. Another big issue is privilege. So when you share information with an attorney, you have this privilege. And the idea is that our society wants you to be able to tell the truth to your attorney and to have your attorney advocate on behalf of you the best that they can. And that requires that there be some trust, that relationship and what's shared in that interaction is private. And that's why we say that it's privileged. And so if you're trying to generate something, like let's say you're trying to generate a complaint and you're using the prompt with the generative AI and you're putting in a bunch of client information that is privileged, where is that information going? ChatGPT, it's taking what it's been given and then it's using it to regenerate more and more work. But we're seeing already that the companies that are really working on generative AI and working on it for lawyers are making sure that that privilege is dealt with and that lawyers can comfortably put information into an AI product and get generative AI back without compromising privilege. Another interesting one is unauthorized practice of law by generative AI. So unauthorized practice of law means that only lawyers can practice law. And a few years back, there was a algorithmic AI software product created for bankruptcy, where if you were going to go into bankruptcy, you could have this interactive dialogue with this software, and you would ask it it would ask you a question, you would answer, and it would sort of lead you down a road, like, well, you should probably end up doing this. And ultimately, the software was prohibited because a court determined that that was unauthorized practice of law, because the generative AI would take the responses and then lead the client down a road. So ultimately, we have to be careful that generative AI isn't practicing law and not using just algorithms to lead clients down decision holes and decision trees. Here's another thing. We lawyers, we have to be competent in technology. It's required. We need to know how to e-file. We need to know how to use the basic technology that's required for us to effectively be lawyers. And that is going to increasingly require that we know how to responsibly and effectively engage with generative AI, whether we like it or not. And I'll tell you the truth, a year ago when I first learned of ChatGPT, I kind of wanted to just pretend it didn't exist because it just felt really different. But I kind of leaned in because we at the law school need to learn about it so that we can teach our students how to use it effectively and responsibly. And I've been doing my best to learn about it, but I know it's kind of a big lift. Unfortunately, though, not only the law, but other professions, we got to learn about it. We have to be competent and know how to use it. One thing that I think is really exciting is the legal aid opportunities that generative AI has. I mean, there's so much of a need for legal aid, especially in rural states like Montana, and there just aren't enough people who are willing or able to provide free advice, free representation to all of the people who need it. It takes a lot of work to draft and to think through how to do a lot of the pro bono work that's needed out there. But generative AI that can generate templates, can generate pleadings, can even do intake, and that's really a huge saver as long as you have a person who is actually interacting with the client and the generative AI at some level. But it could really open up some of this access to justice that we've been struggling for so many years to try to continue to foster in our state and across the country. For example, I think what I heard a while back is the Innocence Project, which is a nonprofit in California. Well, they're everywhere. We have one in Montana. They had a company create an algorithm and used AI to upload all of these case files from all of these potential wrongful convictions. And the AI used an algorithm to identify the cases that were most likely wrongful convictions so that the Innocence Project could then focus on those cases and put their limited resources more in that area. So there's a lot of really good that generative AI can do through the legal community. So I think I've just thrown a lot at you guys, but we have a little bit of time left. I would love to get your thoughts. I see that we have one question. I would love to see more questions. I'd love to start having a dialogue, or if anybody has any input, I welcome input as well. As I mentioned, I kind of wasn't excited about generative AI at first, and I'm still, struggling to make sure that I understand what it is, but I'm getting a little excited about it in some ways.
Well, thank you, Professor Conley. And yes, we do have a question here, and that is, can ChatGPT draft a will or a contract so people won't have to use lawyers for these types of documents?
It's a great question. The short answer is no. You can get ChatGPT to draft you a will or draft you a contract, but it's probably not going to be a very good one. And you wouldn't want it to replace an attorney. What is more likely is that an attorney that you hire could use generative AI to save themselves time and you billable hours to create a will or create a contract, and then use their human judgment and their expertise and judgment to make sure that it's right for you, because every situation is different. And while certainly it's going to be a time saver for generating templates, I don't think that it's quite there yet as far as replacing us.
Great, thank you. And yes, now is the time for any questions. So if anyone else wants to submit questions, I have another question, Professor Conley, is just how susceptible to hacking or the security of AI, what are things looking like there? I just feel like there's probably a lot of areas where this could be abused by bad actors.
For sure. Yeah. And I think it is being abused by bad actors outside of the legal profession. And that's a big issue with how is it being used. And once people get a hold of it because your information is out there, where is it going? As far as the legal profession goes, that's one thing I'm really excited about, is I think the generative AI products that we're going to have available to us are going to be pretty locked down, pretty secure, because it's so important in our profession to have that confidentiality, to have that privilege. I think that's going to be just baked into the products that we end up with in the next couple of years.
Great. And we have another question, and that is, have any laws been proposed in Montana to regulate AI yet?
That's a great question. When I went ahead and looked at that website that identified proposed and in effect laws in different state legislatures, Montana's row was blank. So not that I know of, but I bet there could be.
Thank you. See if we have any other questions here this evening.
Yeah, if there's any other questions, great. If not, we can finish a little early. But I'm just really grateful for the people who joined tonight. Thank you for joining, and thank you, Joel. I really appreciate your time. And this is going to be something that we just keep talking about as a profession and as a state.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you. And yeah, if there are no more questions, I will wrap it up. We do have a number of great presentations coming. Next week, we have a day in the life of a judge and a lawyer. We have the Honorable Judge Berger of the 5th Judicial District, who's going to be presenting, as well as David Steele, State Bar President. And in other events that we have planned this year with our series, we have Lieutenant Governor Juris, who's going to be giving a legislative update, and we've got some other great presentations coming on small businesses. We've got Hertha Lund talking about water law, who is one of the foremost authorities on water law in the state. And so yeah, I would just encourage folks to check out the schedule on the State Bar of Montana's website. And yeah, I know a lot of work has gone into our presenters. We also have a Ninth Circuit Judge, Justice Johnstone, who's going to be talking about the Montana Constitution. And so just encourage people to participate. And thank you all for joining us this evening.